Good morning, everyone. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Thank you for joining us. Good morning, everyone. I am Marcia Lacco, the Environmental Assistant Section Chief with oversight of DEQ's Environmental Stewardship Initiative, also known as ESI, and I will be your moderator for today. I want to welcome you to today's webinar, Sierra Nevada, Bigger Than Beer, the first in our environmental benchmarking series for 2021. Okay. The ESI benchmarking events were created to share pollution prevention and sustainability strategies amongst NC organizations. Ideally, we ask ESI members to host these events and provide a tour, but the pandemic forced a hiatus last year, and with continued impacts, we forged ahead with a virtual edition until we can resume in-person events, and hopefully that will be later this year. We would be remiss if we didn't thank Waste Reduction Partners and the Land of Sky Regional Council for hosting this benchmarking event on GoToWebinar for us, and for being wonderful partners for our virtual outreach and training we've done since last spring. Both the ESI program and Waste Reduction Partners are located within DEQ's Division of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service, also known as DEACS. And we are a non-regulatory division within the department. And due to this uniqueness, we created an annual report, and you see the front of that on the screen for customers to learn about our services. So I encourage you to seek that out. It's available on our main website landing page. My little controls keep disappearing. Okay. Before we get started, I want to review the GoToWebinar platform. If you have issues with your computer audio, we suggest that you first use the audio tab in the control box to ensure that your speaker and microphone settings are correct. In our current virtual world, we're jumping from one platform to another, and sometimes this throws off your mic and your speaker settings. So this may be the problem if you can't hear the audio. If adjusting those settings doesn't work, our next suggestion is to log out and log back into the GoToWebinar platform. We've had an issue with that ourselves, so hopefully that will do the trick to fix your audio issues. And if that fails, then we suggest you switch to using your phone to provide audio for the webinar. If you go into the control tab and choose phone, it will produce a phone number and a webinar code for you to use. But that call-in information is also in the email webinar invite that you received from D. Hannock. We are recording today's webinar, and the link for the recording and the PowerPoint slides will be posted to the ESI website under our event section, and that's www.ncesi.org. To prevent feedback and unintended noise, We do have all the attendees muted right now. We do encourage you to ask questions at any time during the webinar, but we will be holding responses until the end of the presentation by our two panelists. You can submit your questions either using the question tab in the control box and typing that in, and Angela Barger and Ron Pridgeon of our staff will be assisting today with that process. You are also welcome to raise your hand during the Q&A to verbally ask a question. On the control panel, you should see a symbol that looks like a little hand, and clicking on it sends us a notice that you would like to speak. Don Burke will be recognizing and unmuting those who wish to verbally ask your questions. So let's try that out since we had a glitch with that functionality during one of our last webinars. So if a few of the audience members will raise their hands to ensure Don can see them on our end.
And Marcia, they're coming in as you speak.
Okay, perfect. Great. That's working today. Wonderful. Okay. Next slide. All right, so before we get started, I wanted to quickly highlight DEQ's ESI program, which both recognizes organizations for the environmental management and sustainability programs, but also allows organizations to serve as leaders to others in the state through our networking and peer sharing programs, such as today's webinar. ESI is supported through an EPA pollution prevention grant and state appropriations and is free to join. Members take advantage of our personalized assistance to identify resources and assist them in completing their established environmental goals. Requirement of membership is the submission of an annual report, and that data is aggregated each year. And our most recent data is highlighted. And from looking at that, it's clear that our member efforts are resulting in improvements to the state's environment, economy, and the health of the citizens of the state. The ESI has 3 membership levels. Our higher 2 levels require the implementation of an environmental management system, and all levels require the establishment of environmental goals, in addition to submission of that annual member report that I just mentioned. Angela and Don would love to discuss the program with you if you want to learn more. Okay. As I noted earlier, we promote and support our members, and here you'll see logos from all of our participating organizations. We have public and private organizations, small and large companies, local, state, and federal government entities, service providers, widget makers, and those who feed our bellies and quench our thirst. Our members prove that there is commonality in our shared goals to each improve our environmental performance and that we can learn from each other's struggles and triumphs. Earlier, I mentioned the Waste Reduction Partners Program, who provide engineering and technical solutions for North Carolina organizations. The 40+ retired engineers and scientists identify efficiencies that also pinpoint cost savings through energy, water, and waste prevention and other associated projects. WRP just celebrated its 20th year, and through their efforts, they've identified over $137 million in cost savings for their clients, among other accomplishments. If you're interested in their services, we have provided the contact information for Terry Albrecht, who's the program manager, and you can learn more and set a project request on their website. Finally, I wanted to highlight North Carolina Sustainable Tourism Program, NC Green Travel. The program is a joint effort with DEQ, Department of Commerce, and ECU to promote and recognize businesses that have worked to improve their environmental footprint. Similar to ESI, it has 3 levels of membership noted by Dogwood Flowers. Members include breweries, wineries, distilleries, lodging and dining, and attractions such as farm tourism. Many of these businesses have been hard hit during the pandemic, so I encourage you to use the Green Travel website to seek out these opportunities to help support NC tourism as we lift COVID-19 restrictions in the state. If you're interested in learning more, please reach out to Tom Rhodes of Deeks, and he can also provide an application. All right, with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We'll start with Leah Cooper, the Sustainability Program Manager for Sierra Nevada Brewing Company in Mills River, North Carolina. And she works on environmental initiatives aimed at building and enduring a resilient company. Leah manages greenhouse gas reduction projects on the plant level, ranging from energy generation and efficiency, zero waste, water conservation, and alternative transportation. Along with continuous improvement projects, she is responsible for educating and engaging employees around environmental issues and advocating for projects and groups in alignment with company values within the local Western North Carolina community. We'll also hear from Mike Green with DEQ's Recycling Business Assistance Center, who will supplement Leah's discussion of Sierra Nevada's materials management related to consolidation of recycling commodities for breweries in Western North Carolina. Mike has been a business development specialist with RBEC since 2013, where he specializes in recycling markets. He spent 7 years prior to that with the City of Greensboro's recycling program and helped to launch their ABC recycling service in 2008. Mike is a graduate of Appalachian State University. With that, Leah, I am going to switch the presentation over to you. Great. I see your presentation, Leah, and I see you. Although I don't hear you, Leah.
All right, sorry about that. I am very excited to be here today, and thank you for joining us. Hopefully in the future we can host a similar event at the brewery and you'll be able to visit us. But without further ado, we'll hop into our presentation here. I'm going to talk with you a little bit about how we approach sustainability at Sierra Nevada, some of the investments we've made at our Mills River Brewery, how we drive continuous improvement, and then finally I'll tag team with Mike to share a case study of the Western North Carolina Brewery Recycling Cooperative. But first, I like to start with a little bit of history because I think that perfectly illustrates why Sierra Nevada is so invested in sustainability. Sierra Nevada was founded in 1980 by Ken Grossman in Chico, California. As you can see from this picture of Ken mountain climbing, he is an avid outdoorsman and inherent environmentalist, and he really worked to embed those values into business operations from day one. When Sierra Nevada was founded, the craft brewing landscape was a drastically different place. There were very few small-scale craft breweries. There was virtually no financing available to open a craft brewing business, and there wasn't even small-scale craft brewing equipment available on the market. So in order to be successful, Ken had to be as efficient as possible because any wasted energy or water negatively impacted his bottom line. Reduce, reuse, recycle was built into our business model from day one. And I think you can see that pretty perfectly illustrated with our very first brew kettle, which is pictured in this blue warehouse where my mouse is here. Because there wasn't small scale brewing equipment available, Ken went to the local community college and learned how to weld. And then he built his own brewing kettle out of a decommissioned dairy vat, an old fruit hopper, and a heating element from a car wash. And he did such a good job that that kettle is still operational today. It was used by Mad River Brewing Company, and then in 2020, on our 40th anniversary, we bought that kettle back. When Ken was brewing his beer, he was working to brew beer that he wanted to drink. So beer that was robust and bold, which was very different from what was available in the market at the time. And he has this great saying that, 90% of the people that tried his beer when he first opened hated it, but the 10% who didn't hate it really loved it. And they're what carried us forward. Those 10% allowed us to open up a second brewery or a second location in Chico, California, which is our headquarters. We've grown and expanded that brewery over the years. In the early 2010s, we realized that we needed a second brewery in order to meet demand. In 2012, we started construction on our new home in Mills River, North Carolina. In 2014, we started brewing, and then in 2015, we opened up to the public. Today, we are the third largest craft brewery in the United States. We brew over 1 million barrels of beer, split pretty evenly between both of our breweries. And in 2020, we enrolled a second brand called Strange Beast, which is a hard kombucha brand. But through all this growth, we are still family owned and operated, and that is a pivotal part of our sustainability story because, as I mentioned, Ken has really been our #1 sustainability champion since day one. He's been the one driving investments in new technology, driving efficiency improvements, and building a sustainable culture. Ken has slowly started to take a step back from the company as his children, Sierra Grossman and Brian Grossman, pictured here, have stepped up into leadership roles. And they maintain that value of sustainability because they're interested in seeing the company exist for generations and generations to come. So when we talk about sustainability at Sierra Nevada, we're really talking about how we can build a resilient, long-lasting, and thriving business. And the best way for us to do that is to focus on the 3 pillars of sustainability, which you all may be very well familiar with. But all of our decisions, we need to make sure that we're creating a business that is economically stable. That's certainly a no-brainer. We need to continue to earn revenue so we can meet our operating cost and reinvest in the future. But we also need to focus on social equity. We need to understand how our business is impacting the community and our employees. And you can see this investment in our philanthropy within the community, as well as in our very robust safety and wellness programs. Both of our sites have on-site doctors' clinics. We offer free yoga, free massage, and free acupuncture to all employees. And we do these investments because we understand and we know that happy, healthy employees bring their best selves to work and they're more invested in the company. And then finally, we also need to focus on our environment, especially as a business in the food and beverage industry who relies on natural resources. It's imperative that we understand what our impacts are on the environment and what our risks are. If we don't have access to clean, abundant water, we don't have a business. If climate change is shifting growing regions and impacting our farmers, we don't have access to affordable or high quality ingredients. So it is imperative for us to consider not only our financial stability, but also our environmental and social impacts. And I know I'm certainly biased, but I think Sierra Nevada does a fantastic job balancing these 3 priorities. Pretty much all, really, of the programs and investments we've made that I'm going to talk about today have a financial ROI, but we've certainly invested in programs that maybe have a long ROI or have an intangible financial benefit. But we've done that and we've taken on that risk because we understand that this investment in healthy environment and social equity is a long-term investment in the resilience of our company, similar to how you would invest in your 401k today. As the world has changed over the past 40 years, it's become pretty apparent that we are facing, both as a business, as a state, and as a world, some pretty complex, disruptive challenges. So as we move forward as a company and grow and increase our ambitions of the sustainability program, we like to start with a broad vision to drive our action and drive the initiatives that we're developing. We start with climate resilient. So we're envisioning a climate resilient business and world. We're looking at ways to mitigate our impacts as well as adapt to the changing climate. Nature positive is the second pillar of our sustainability strategy. We need to understand how our use of natural resources is impacting the world around us. How are we impacting biodiversity loss? How can we ensure that we have access to high quality and abundant water? And then finally, we envision a people forward world. How can Sierra Nevada build a space that is inclusive and just and equitable for both our employees and our consumers? So when we think about our approach to sustainability, we really start with these 3 visions, and that drives our action. But first we need a foundation, and that foundation for us is integrating sustainability into business operations and functions. That includes strategic planning, making sure that risk is managed and understood on a strategic level, making sure that our employees are accountable and understand how their roles funnel up into these big, broad visions. And then finally, transparency and communication is another focus area as part of our business integration. And this is something that we've been working on over the past few years. Just last year, a couple examples of changes that we've made that are included in this business integration include having sustainability criteria added to our company RFPs, as well as adding criteria to our capital project workbooks. Once we have our foundation built, we can start working with inside of our walls to meet these big, broad goals. Operational sustainability is something that Sierra Nevada has been working on for a very long time. In the craft brewing industry, we are leaders in operational sustainability. But with these new focus areas, we're working more towards reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We're looking at ways to protect the natural resources that we use, create closed loops, support a circular economy, and drive zero waste adoption. And then finally, we're also looking at ways to improve equity and inclusion within our workspace. But as I said earlier, these challenges are global and systemic, and we cannot reach our goals if we're just looking inside our four walls. So something we've started to focus on more recently is systems change actions. How can we leverage our brand to drive change outside of our four walls in order to reach our goals? And that includes working within our supply chain to drive adoption of new technologies to reduce impacts. It also includes advocating for policies that are in alignment with our values. And then finally, building relationships within our community and supporting philanthropic efforts. And that's a lot. That's a ton of moving pieces, a lot of different roles involved in making all of these things happen. So what does that mean from the day-to-day, and what does that mean for our Mills River Brewery? Well, first, we did our very best to design in efficiency to the Mills River Brewery. We learned a lot from our Chico facility. If you've ever visited our Chico brewery, you may understand or notice that it is kind of a labyrinth. It's really easy to get lost there. We've added on and added on and added on to that building over the years. So we learned a lot from our Chico facility that we were able to apply to Mills River. And we did a pretty good job. We got a lot of recognition, one of the biggest ones of which is our LEED certification. Our Mills River Brewery is the only platinum LEED certified production brewery in the United States. And we're incredibly proud of that accomplishment. One of the reasons we chose to go with LEED is because of the vast number of investments that are included within the certification. But as you can see from our scorecard here, most of the points we received was actually in the energy and atmosphere category, and that's a big contributor to our platinum certification. Part of those points were for on-site energy generation. Sierra Nevada is a big supporter of solar. Between both of our sites, we can claim having the largest solar array in craft brewing. We have many more solar panels at our California facility. At our Mills River Brewery, we have a 600 kilowatt system, most of which is on the roof of our packaging and warehouse. In addition to solar, we also have 2 capstone microturbines, which altogether are a 400 kilowatt system. Those are run on biogas from our wastewater treatment plant. Now, it's not unusual for breweries of our size to have a wastewater treatment plant. Waste brewing water has a lot of organic matter in it, and we produce a lot of wastewater. So one, it would be incredibly expensive to send all of that waste to the city for treatment. And two, the city just simply could not handle the volume and organic load that we produce. So this wastewater treatment, or this pre-treatment facility that we have, is essential for our business. But what is unique and I think most exciting about this treatment plant is the closed loop system that we've designed. All of our spent brewing wastewater will go to the anaerobic digester, which is the larger tank you can see here. All of the organic matter is broken down by acetogens and methanogens into methane, and then that methane is used to offset natural gas in our boilers and to power these microturbines. Altogether, when everything is said and done, Both the solar and the microturbines account for about 15% of our electricity needs on site. But that's only a part of our energy management system. We really spend most of our time thinking about ways to be more efficient. So in addition to having insulated, well-built buildings, using daylighting, using a building monitoring system and a lighting monitoring system, we've also designed in other closed-loop systems to reduce our energy use. Two of those systems, or our most impactful systems, are heat recovery loops. The biggest one is within our brewing process itself. As wort leaves our kettle and goes to fermentation, it cools down. We recover that heat and reuse it at the beginning of the brewing process, which means instead of using our boilers and all that natural gas to heat up our water from room temperature to boiling, we're only having to heat it a few degrees. In addition to that heat recovery loop, we also recover heat from our air compressors. As I'm sure many of you are familiar, air compressors are used throughout the facility to make our packaging and equipment work. They also produce a lot of waste heat. So instead of letting that waste heat dissipate into the atmosphere, we've created a closed loop system where we can recover that waste and then reuse it on site. So when we open on May 12th and you come visit our facility, maybe you drink a lot of beer and go to the bathroom, when you wash your hands, that hot water is heated using waste heat from our air compressors. When all is said and done, all of these heat recovery loops have resulted in a 49.5% energy cost savings compared to a traditional brewery of our size. Along with energy management, water management is another focus area for us. As you can imagine, brewing beer is incredibly water intensive. According to the Brewers Association, which you can see the graphic here on the left, brewers of Sierra Nevada's size use anywhere between 3 to 5 barrels of beer, but that is certainly impacted by economy of size. Other brewers, maybe a small brew pub down the street from you, could use anywhere to 47 barrels of beer to make barrels of water to make 1 barrel of beer. So in order to address this water usage, we've again designed in closed loop systems and made sure that we've purchased as efficient as possible equipment. One of our biggest closed loop systems is our recovery on the bottle line. All of our bottles are rinsed before they're filled. That water is fairly clean because they're rinsing out empty bottles, so we recover it and reuse it to cool down equipment in our packaging line. That provided a significant water savings for us. But in addition to these upfront investments, we also focus on continuous improvement. And one way we do that is looking at our water usage as a KPI on a regular basis. As you can see here, we use about 3.5 barrels of water to make 1 barrel of beer. And part of that is due to our investment in water conservation, but it also has to do with some projects that we've implemented in the past year. Our brewing team has done a lot of great work to optimize CIPs and create additional closed loop systems. So while our barrelage and water usage is actually down due to COVID, we do hope to continue maintaining this 3.5 barrels of water per barrel of beer well into 2021. And our usage is down, just to clarify, because we are producing so much more beer. And because we benchmark our water usage against the beer packaged, it's changed our metrics a little bit. In addition to that, we haven't been using our keg line, which is one of our most intensive packaging lines, or water intensive packaging lines. But water we use on site is only a small portion of our water story as a company. Sierra Nevada uses 3 sources of water at our Mills River Brewery. We purchase city water to clean the facility and run our CIPs. We use water from wells on site. We have 3 wells to brew our beer. And then finally, we also use collected rainwater. Because we're using water from our site, and because we are right next to the French Broad River, it is imperative that we are responsible stewards of stormwater that enters our site. This was a totally new challenge for us coming from California, so we worked with Design Workshop to design a pretty state-of-the-art and multifaceted stormwater management program. It includes a ton of different pieces from bioswales and permeable pavers, but one of the biggest parts of that story is our rainwater recovery. We have 12 6,500 gallon cisterns that collect water from the roof of our warehouse. In addition to that, we have a 450,000 gallon cistern underground that collects water from all of the drains outside you see on our site. And the purpose of the stormwater recovery is to really reduce the flow rate of water leaving our facility. So we're reducing erosion and we're reducing the amount of pollution and sediment entering the French Broad and contaminating our waterways. We use that water that we collect to flush toilets on site as well as to irrigate our landscape. But we couldn't possibly use all of the water that we collect. So in order to manage that appropriately, we've also invested in a engineered stream bed, which is pictured here. That stream bed has a series of settling ponds that allows us to send water from our cistern directly to the French Broad in a slow manner in which sediment can again slowly filter out, making sure that the water leaving our site is as clean as possible. In addition to energy management and water management, we're also thinking about ways that we can create closed loops throughout our facility. And one of our most popular closed loops is our CO2 recovery. As you can imagine, a lot of breweries and a lot of food manufacturers in general use a bunch of CO2 in their manufacturing process. At Sierra Nevada, we use CO2 to purge tanks and to push beer through lines, to name a few. But we also generate a lot of CO2 naturally through fermentation. Before we installed our CO2 recovery system, we were buying CO2 from a fertilizer plant and then shipping it to us from Tennessee. So that was a pretty big impact for our company. We were buying multiple truckloads a day, spending well over $20,000 a month just buying CO2 when we're generating it naturally. So in 2016, when we installed our CO2 recovery system, we saw a 2.5-year payback because it just makes financial sense for us to collect the CO2 we generate on site. But it also benefited our environmental footprint and reduced our impacts. Another part of our impacts that is challenging to get away from as a consumer brand is transportation. And we've done a lot to reduce those impacts both upstream and downstream from the company. One of the biggest things we've done, of course, is build our Mills River brewery. Instead of having to ship beer from California to the East Coast, we're only shipping beer from Mills River to the East Coast. That significantly reduced our impacts downstream. To reduce our impacts upstream, we also invested in a rail spur, which will allow us to use rail to transport bulk malt that we're purchasing for both of our breweries. The rail spur is a really great example of how sustainability can make financial sense. You can fit 4 truckloads of grain into one rail car. It is incredibly efficient. And this investment, building this rail spur to transload grain into a truck, was a multi-million-dollar investment, but it paid off in less than a year. So now instead of shipping grain from the middle of the United States to our Mills River brewery via truck, we're shipping it via rail and then transloading it to a truck and driving it the rest of the 10 miles to the brewery. That's made a significant impact on our upstream transportation. In addition to these investments, we also work to advocate for alternative transportation within our communities. We do that through advocating for greenways and bike paths, but also through providing EV charging free of charge to guests and employees. We have 2 level 2 chargers in our front lot, and we actually just received a grant from the DEQ or the state to install 4 additional chargers, which will be available to employees and guests free of charge. We really want our employees to use alternative transportation. So in addition to all of these other investments, we've also created a program called RIDE, which stands for Reducing Individual Driver Emissions. And that is entirely the purpose of the program. We're looking to reduce the emissions associated with employee commuting. If employees take the bus, carpool, walk, or ride their bike to work, we will pay them $2 a day added directly to their paycheck, which is a pretty awesome benefit. And if you've ever visited us in Mills River, you may notice that we don't have the best infrastructure for alternative transportation. There's not a bus line very close to us. Biking is left for those who are strong, experienced riders, but we still do have quite a few employees taking advantage of this program. And as we advocate for more infrastructure and we start to see the community adopting alternative transportation infrastructure in our region, we know that will only increase. All of the things I've talked about today have some type of financial or some type of environmental and financial impact for the company. One of the ways that we measure those impacts is through a greenhouse gas inventory. Sierra Nevada has been reporting our Scope 1 and 2 emissions since 2009, and we know pretty intimately how we're doing within our operations. In 2018, we created our benchmark inventory to include our entire value chain. And what we learned from this inventory is that while we've done a great job focusing within inside of our walls, a vast majority of both our opportunity to improve as well as our risk lives within our supply chain. Over 80% of our emissions are within our supply chain, which is pretty significant. And this is one of the reasons that systems change actions has become part of our sustainability strategy. While we don't have direct operational control over our supply chain, we are able to leverage our brand and advocate and work with suppliers to reduce their impacts. Looking a little bit more closely at our emissions, you can see that most of the emissions from our facility come from purchased goods, and that is both ingredients like hops and malt, as well as packaging material, boxes, cans, bottles. Any type of work that we do within our operations to reduce waste directly impacts this Scope 3 emission, even outside of our supply chain work. But in addition to working on our emissions within our purchased goods supply chain category 1, we're also looking at ways to reduce emissions associated with transportation and on-site with our natural gas usage. Those are really our biggest areas of opportunity. And as you can see here, when I talked about RIDE, I talked about reducing emissions from employee commuting. About 2% of our entire inventory is just from employee commuting, which is pretty significant. So we've already invested in and created programs to address some of these emissions. And while we are working towards building out a long-term greenhouse gas mitigation strategy and vetting different investments that we can make, we've also started to use this data on site to drive continuous improvement. And one way that we've done that is with this really low-tech Excel emissions calculator that you see here. So we've created a calculator from our baseline inventory to measure the impacts of different process changes and projects that our employees are looking at. And this is one way to start getting people to think about our emissions so we understand and have a better opportunity to reduce them in the future. And it's been really helpful. We've used this for a lot of different projects, and just a quick case study, one example of how we've used it is when evaluating vendors. Back in 2020, we had a vendor from the UK reach out to us presenting a new malt that they were selling that was at a significantly reduced price due to Brexit. The financials of that switch would have been really great for the company. We would have reduced our costs pretty significantly, but our supply chain team felt a little weird and a little uncomfortable with the potential transportation impacts that change would have. Currently, pretty much all of our malt is bought domestically, and the bulk of it is shipped to us via rail. But they didn't quite understand what that transportation impact would be. So using our greenhouse gas inventory, we were able to measure the difference between both of our vendors. If we were to send malt to us via rail, or if we were to ship it via cargo ship to a port and then drive it to either of our breweries. And while in the grand scheme of things in our scope 3 inventory, it really wasn't a big impact, when we looked at just upstream transportation and just malt transportation in particular, it was pretty significant. Armed with this data, our supply chain team was able to go back to our supplier and negotiate a better price. So we both had a better price and we were able to maintain our emission inventory without potentially increasing it from changing vendors. And then finally, I also wanted to talk a little bit about zero waste. And this is a significant part of our sustainability story, and it's how we approach and think about sustainability. Zero waste is actually, the cornerstone of our sustainability program. Our very first sustainability hire was a recycling coordinator. So we've been thinking about zero waste for a really long time, and we've invested in building relationships within our community, buying equipment, setting up bins to source separate all of our materials. And we've been very successful in doing that both within our operations as well as within our events. Both of our facilities are Platinum True Zero Waste certified. So we know that we've done a great job setting up our zero waste program, but we're always looking for ways to improve. And one of the best ways to do that is to really think critically about the type of data you're looking at and how it can drive improvement. So we look at our diversion data to help understand the health of our zero waste program. And for those of you that aren't familiar, you calculate diversion by weighing or estimating all of the waste material leaving your facility, and then the percent of material that does not go to the landfill, or for some certifications and for Sierra Nevada does not go to incineration, is your diversion rate. When I started at the company, our diversion rate was about 99.5 in 2015. And that was including spent grain. But as you can imagine, a brewery produces a ton of spent grain, and that really changes what our diversion rate looks like. So once we excluded spent grain, we were better able to identify areas of opportunity. And as you can see here, we quickly grew our diversion rate over the years. Even though just looking at our spent grain diversion, you wouldn't have any idea that our program changed at all. And I think that is particularly apparent in our 2020 data. And you may ask, what in the world happened from February to June? Well, unfortunately, we lost our ability to compost organic waste, along with food waste from our break rooms and some of the operations within our tap room. We also use our composting hauler to dispose of spent hops from different brewing processes. So we produce a ton of organic waste outside of our spent grain, which actually goes to cattle feed. So losing this vendor had a significant impact on our diversion goal. But that was really only part of the picture. Even though we lost our ability to compost, we had done a lot of really great work to reduce waste. So in order to better highlight the zero waste hierarchy and focus on reduction and reuse, we also look at and build goals around the overall pounds of waste per barrel of beer produced. And this, again, is excluding spent grain, but also includes landfill, compost, recycling, reuse, all of the waste that we're producing. And by looking at this data, we can better identify and see how our zero waste efforts are impacting our program. In February through June, when our diversion rate was down really low, you can see we actually improved in overall waste produced. We reduced the amount of waste that we were producing, and that's not something that we would have seen just looking at our diversion rate. Whereas in January, which was one of our highest months when we were looking at diversion, that was actually one of our worst months when we were looking at total waste produced. And part of that is because in January, we were getting rid of some seasonal packaging that we didn't use. For instance, if a company, and this isn't necessarily a true thing that happened in January, but as an example, if we bought, say, 10 truckloads of packaging material, decided we weren't going to make that brand anymore, and then recycled all of that material, that would make our diversion rate look fantastic. But that is not financially sustainable, and it is not a zero waste behavior. So we want to make sure we're looking at data that takes into account all of these different nuances of a zero waste program. And the reason that we focus on waste reduction is because it really just makes the most sense, both financially and from an environmental standpoint. So we spent a lot of time thinking about ways we can creatively reuse materials, as well as working with our vendors to make sure that we have reusable materials coming in, whether those are pallets and slip sheets, or even just propane canisters. But again, we do that because it makes the most sense and it gives us the most bang for our buck. And you can see that illustrated here. I know this is a big graph with a lot of stuff going on. So to break it down, we pay money in Mills River to have a zero waste program for renting bins, hauling material. That is seen with the red bar in the negative. But because we source separate our materials, we're also earning revenue. So when you take into account the cost of services and the revenue that we earn, that's where we get our net cost. And this is something that fluctuates based on the market. In 2016, we did a lot of work to streamline and improve our zero waste program to reduce costs and increase revenue. And we saw a benefit from that. We actually had a net cost of negative $1,000 in 2017. But as the market has changed over the past year, we've seen that net cost change as well. So that's certainly something to consider, but it's not the only reason to have a zero waste program. In fact, the main financial benefit of a zero waste program is that avoided cost, which you can see here in the blue bar. This is the cost that it would take to send all of the material that Sierra Nevada is diverting from landfill to the landfill, which would be incredibly expensive. Why would we pay all that money to send this material to the landfill when we could be earning revenue or not paying anything at all? When we take into account avoided cost, that's when we get our net savings, which also, of course, varies based on the market, but has been significant for every year that Mills River has operated. We've never had a net savings under $100,000 a year. That more than enough pays for our entire sustainability program and all of the employee programming that we do. And this is just Mills River. So it's just our Mills River brewery, and it also excludes our spent grain. If I had included spent grain in this graph, it would just be astronomical, the numbers that we would see. So again, having a zero waste program makes financial sense. We've done a lot of work within our four walls to build our zero waste program, but just like all these other challenges that we've talked about or I've mentioned today, zero waste is regional and global, or recycling is regional and global, so it makes sense for us also to work outside of our four walls to support recycling infrastructure. And we do that through the Brewers Association, as well as with partnering with regional nonprofits like SERDIC and the Glass Recycling Coalition. In the past, our main focus has been on glass recycling because we produce part of our product in glass bottles, and we feel it's our responsibility to ensure that consumers are able to dispose of those glass bottles after drinking our beer. There's a lot of challenges around glass recycling, which I'm sure I don't need to go into today, with a lot of communities eliminating glass recycling entirely from their collection. For instance, Greenville, South Carolina, and I believe Houston, Texas, no longer accept glass for recycling. So we've worked with our sales team to host glass collection events. And then more regionally, we've also worked with American Recycling to build a bunker specifically for brewery glass. When we first opened in 2015 and started recycling our glass, there really wasn't any option for clean, source-separated brewery glass. We actually had a very convoluted system where we were renting 3 roll-offs. We paid for those 3 roll-offs to be hauled to the local transfer station. Then we paid for them to be transloaded into a truck. And then we paid for that to be shipped to Reflective, who is now Strategic. As you can imagine, that was incredibly expensive. It was not sustainable financially in any way. So we ended up working with American Recycling to figure out a way to collect that material on site at their MRF. And that included building a bunker just for brewery glass. And all of this work we've done both internally and within the community has given us a reputation in the area. Over the past few years, we've had multiple businesses and breweries reach out to us asking how we can build a zero waste program, how they can recycle certain hard to recycle materials that all breweries have, like malt bags or shrink wrap. And just informally, over the years, we've allowed breweries to drop off materials at Sierra Nevada. We're able to recycle those materials because we have space to store them. We produce a large volume of that material. We have equipment and labor to process that material. So we thought we'd share the wealth. We'd allow breweries to bring those materials to us. What we didn't anticipate was the large number of breweries that were interested in recycling these types of materials, and we quickly became overwhelmed collecting them at our site. We had multiple people coming multiple times a week, just dropping off super sacks, and it didn't make any sense. And luckily, around that time when we started to see, you know, this isn't working, we need to do something different, I connected and met with Mike Green, who's about to share a presentation with us here in a second. And Mike talked to me about a brewery recycling cooperative he had been working on. And this idea just seemed like the answer to our prayers and dreams, and something that really made sense for our region. So in May of 2019, we got together all of those interested breweries that had been informally dropping things out or reaching out to us, and had a kickoff meeting for the Brewery Recycling Cooperative. There are about 15 businesses represented there, and Mike came to visit us, and he presented this presentation he's about to share with you now.
Awesome, Leah. Thank you so much. It's just so inspiring to hear everything that you have going on. So yeah, I am Mike Green. I am part of North Carolina Department Division of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service, and my smaller alphabet soup group from there would be RBAC, the Recycling Business Assistance Center. Okay, next slide. All right, so as Leah said, this all started, I had a small brewery in Durham contact me and said that they were having problems with their recycling program, that the only thing they could really find a common vendor for was cardboard, but they were also dealing with polypropylene grain bags, the foil plastic hybrid hops bags, and stretch wrap. So we went through and did a waste audit and just kind of looked at everything. And yeah, those were kind of the common things that we found. Okay, next slide. So the challenges were that these were hard to recycle items. The vendors would not take small quantities. You really need to look at truckloads. It was a very small brewery, so they did not have the storage area. And communication and time challenges. This basically was taken on by someone who just had a passion for recycling. And a lot of small operations, everything environmental happens because there's somebody there who takes it upon themselves and is passionate about it. The problem is recycling is not their only job, and trying to wrangle different vendors for everything and work up different arrangements for every single material is extremely time consuming. Okay, next. Okay, so some of the challenges, your problem recyclables are not always the most valuable material. Markets fluctuate. I know when the Chinese ban on different plastics and paper first went into place, there were a lot of problems with the material not being worth what it was previously. It really led to a buyer's market. I will say that is starting to turn around a bit. We're starting to see market improvement, but the best thing you're looking for is cost avoidance. If you can find a cost neutral solution, that's really your best bet. I think one of the mistakes that the recycling industry made was promoting recycling as a free or as a money making option. And that's not a guarantee. So much of it market driven and quantity driven. Okay, next. All right, so current market conditions, cardboard prices are up. So in 2017, the Chinese government started blocking exported cardboard, paper, and fiber. It was just so contaminated. Um, so it's been really cool to watch the fiber prices go up. I'm a complete market geek, so when the toilet paper rush started happening in the pandemic, I was just all excited, like, oh, let's see what the prices do. So just to give you an indication, cardboard prices at the end of 2019 were $43 per ton, and by the end of 2020, it was up to $110 per ton, and most of that could be credited to well, A, everybody was shopping from home, so they needed to make more boxes, but B, the toilet paper rush. So interesting geekoid fact there for you. Plastics, HDPE and PET have stayed pretty stable. 3 through 7s or bulky rigids did have problems. China quit taking those, and a lot of places did not have solutions for it. But domestic solutions are starting to come about, so that's really exciting. Okay, next. Okay, so we sat down with our brewery in Durham, and she said, "Well, what do the other breweries have?" And so we started looking at different breweries. Tom Rhodes and I started going to different breweries in the area, and we figured out that they all had basically, aside from the organic waste, which was able to go to farm, they had these 4 waste groups in common. Next. And so they said, well, one of them said, well, we put everything in the dumpster. And so we double checked with their recycling company, and they're like, no, we don't want the polypropylene bags and the stretch wrap. We just want cardboard only in that dumpster. So the dumpster was not the solution for the small breweries. Next. Okay, so we reached out to several different industrial recycling companies to see, who could take all of these items and what's the best way to get it to them if we've got a lot of small quantities of it, just, all over a region. And so we came up with the idea of a regional consolidation partnership. And basically all of the breweries would team together to make the quantity of material attractive to a recycling vendor. Okay, next. So the idea we had was that all of the participating breweries would take their material to a central location. Our concept was with these craft breweries, they were always driving around town delivering their kegs and their bottles to the different bars and restaurants and craft brew stores. And what if they could make room for a 50-gallon tote of plastic wrap and paper in the bags, and as they're out making their deliveries, they could just all take it to one point. And then all of the breweries would kind of work together to participate in the labor and to share any cost that would come with the service. Next slide. So we figured out that this one recycler, they were about 80 miles away with the closest recycler I could find that was interested in all of the items. They said that they could take a truckload of the material if it was mixed, but as long as the bales were the same material. So we figured out that each truck would hold 13 bales. and then one Gaylord box, the big box that you see at the bottom, would equal one bale. So basically, if you had 15 Gaylords of the grain bags, you could take that down to one bale. And the same with the hot bags, and the same with the stretch wrap. So basically, you would need room for a truck, 45 Gaylords, room for a baler, and room to store all of your bales. Okay, next. Okay, so we tried to figure out what would everything cost. The grain bags can have value. The plastic wrap can have value. The cardboard can have value. The hops bags were a negative value. Basically, it was going waste to energy. It would cost 13 cents a pound, but we were hoping that the value from the grain bags, plastic wrap, and the cardboard would help to level that out. Baler cost varies. I will say that if a lot of times that if you go into a long-term agreement with a recycler, some of them will provide a baler for you if they can be guaranteed to get that return on their investment. So a trailer rental was around 110 a month. And then the shipping cost, so it was 80 miles from that Durham area to their recycler. And it would be about 425 bucks to ship it at that point. So the cost avoidance came from being able to get rid of your trash dumpster. Cost avoidance came from sharing cost, and cost avoidance came from property tax credit. The state of North Carolina has a property tax program where any square footage that is used for recycling can be taken off of your property tax indefinitely. So there are savings there. Okay, next slide. So regardless of your industry, there are definitely ways to look at different consolidation points. So if you've got hard to recycle things, or if you want to explore consolidation options, please feel free to get a hold of me. You've got my number and my email right there, and I would be happy to work with you. And yeah, it was exciting when Leah reached out. I was able to kind of take this concept, and they were able to just improve it, master it, and make it work for them. And just super exciting to see everything they're working on. So I will hand it back off to Leah.
Thanks, Mike. So after that presentation, we were really excited and engaged and spent the next year and a half looking at ways to build a recycling cooperative for our region. And we started by engaging a variety of different stakeholders. We worked with waste reduction partners and Mike at the DEQ to leverage their expertise in zero waste and the recycling industry, as well as to learn about potential funding that was available to us. We also partnered with American Recycling of Western North Carolina. We had partnered with him on other projects in the past, and Ron is a great guy, and we were happy to work with him on this cooperative. He was vested and interested in all of the legwork that comes with building a cooperative, so he was a great partner as well. And then finally, we leveraged the Asheville Brewers Alliance to get the word out to interested breweries, so we could engage as many breweries as possible. We spent a lot of time collecting data and then identifying and evaluating different collection formats. You know, when we first started, we thought it made sense to have a series of collection sites because no one brewery had enough space to collect an entire trailer's worth of material. So we thought we would have collection sites at 3 different breweries around the region. Highland Brewing Company, Wicked Weed, and Highwire were all interested in potentially being collection sites, in addition to Sierra Nevada. But when we started to look at the numbers there, it just did not make any sense for us to invest in those collection sites. In addition to the cost of transportation to make a route in between all of those collection sites, it also meant that we needed to invest in processing equipment like balers for all 3 sites, which just became pretty astronomical when it came to price. And the value of our materials didn't really cover as much as we thought it would. So we looked into other options. We also talked to the local transfer station to see if they could host a drop-off location there. Unfortunately, the types of materials we were collecting, they needed totally different equipment than what they had in place. So we would, again, still have to invest in that equipment. And because the transfer station was associated with the county, it meant that only breweries within that county would potentially be able to use the drop-off location, which was kind of a no-starter for us because we had over 15 breweries in 4 different counties that were interested in participating. So we wanted to make sure that the format that we chose could service all of those breweries and all of the breweries in Western North Carolina because we knew the interest was significant. We also wanted to make sure we maximized the value for participants and reduced the total burden. So we ended up, after a lot of thinking and back and forth, deciding to build a drop-off location at American Recycling, the local material recovery facility. And this was pretty perfect for us for a lot of reasons. One, it meant that we didn't have to worry about the labor associated with hosting and managing a drop-off site. American Recycling is a recycling business. They have all the equipment, mostly, that you need to process these materials. They also have labor on site in order to process these materials. The only infrastructure we needed there was a safe, separated drop-off location that would allow breweries to leave their materials. In addition to all of those benefits that really reduce the cost of the program, by building a drop-off location at this material recovery facility, it meant we also qualified for a grant to cover some of the costs, to buy a PET chipper for strapping that we were hoping to recycle, as well as to build out that drop-off deck, that dock. So overall, that was really the best option for us. And because we were at the material recovery facility, it also meant that we could collect a wide variety of materials outside of just those hard to recycle materials that the cooperative was originally created for. And this was pretty important for us because we found that it added value. You know, breweries that are interested, and really any small business that's interested in participating, is going to have to take on the burden of transportation to send their material to this program. So if we're able to reduce their total landfill costs, like Mike mentioned in his presentation, but also potentially allow them to eliminate their recycling services and send all of their recyclables to this cooperative, it increased the value of participating. We were very lucky to have been awarded that grant. We're working on building the drop-off location now, and we hope to see it open in the next month or so. Already, you know, just with our initial press release out, we've had many businesses reach out to us that are in all sorts of different businesses and industries that have similar waste, whether that's shrink wrap or cardboard they're looking to get rid of. So we know this is going to be a pretty popular program when it rolls out. But I wanted to leave you with just some lessons learned in case you're interested in building your own cooperative. This isn't necessarily a new concept. There's a lot of different case studies you could look at around the country that are all formatted very differently. So when it comes to the brewing industry, Great Divide Brewing Company, Bell's, and Allagash all have built their own brewery recycling cooperative. The difference between the Western North Carolina cooperative and the brewery recycling, or the other recycling cooperatives, is that we host our drop-off location at a material recovery facility, whereas all of those breweries invested in equipment on their own site, and they're allowing other businesses to bring the material to them. That works great for their location. Because of the huge number of breweries within our region, we didn't think it really made sense. And after our experience hosting a pilot drop-off at Sierra Nevada, we didn't think anyone would possibly be able to manage all of the labor associated with that. But that certainly makes sense for a lot of regions. So make sure that you consider your community's needs and limitations. I also highly recommend identifying and engaging with a variety of different partners. They don't have to be within your industry. They could be anyone that has similar waste streams, nonprofits, other recycling businesses. You need to look for someone who is vested and interested in supporting the cooperative, and then work to collaboratively construct that cooperative together. I think one of the things that caused us to take a really long time is that I felt really cognizant of the amount of time I was asking of these other breweries, and I didn't want to put the burden on them to develop this program. So it took a lot of my time, and I'm not full-time looking at building recycling cooperatives, so it took longer than it otherwise would. So please look at ways to leverage those partnerships. And then also think outside of the box and remember to keep it simple. We created really convoluted and complicated solutions in our head, but when it came down to it, really the most simple and obvious solution was the best and made the most sense for our region. So with that, I want to just leave you with some images of both of our sites and a reminder that we have a great website that shares content about our sustainability programs and includes some pretty awesome sustainability interactive maps. So I talked about a ton of stuff today, but couldn't have possibly touched on all the very different exciting investments that Sierra Nevada has made. So if you're interested and want to learn more, you can visit our website and check out these interactive maps. And then finally, questions?
All
Thanks,
righty.
Leah.
Okay.
Sorry.
There's Angela. Angela and Ron are going to handle our question and answer session.
Sure. Thanks, Leah. That was a really great presentation, and Mike as well. Lots of great information. Just a reminder to folks that are on the webinar, you feel free to type in questions in the chat box over on the right-hand side, or feel free to raise your hand. Dawn will be watching for hand raises. We've got a couple of questions to get started with. And the first one is for Leah. How do you manage your sanitary wastewater? You talked about your wastewater from your processes, but how about the sanitary wastewater?
That's a great question and a very specific distinction that I actually didn't make, but all of our spent brewing water goes to our pre-treatment facility and then to the city for further treatment. All of our sanitary wastewater goes directly to the city and it's treated there. We don't do any treatment on site of that waste.
Wonderful, wonderful. Dawn, I think you said you had somebody who with a hand up?
Yes, earlier Richard Sloan had his hand up. Richard, if you still like to ask that, just raise your hand again. But we do have David Lowell's down. David, I'm going to unmute you. So the floor is yours.
Two questions. Number one, can you explain in more detail what happened in about the 15-minute mark when you had that blue line that dipped way down and you said something about loss of composting facilities? That's question number one.
Yes, so that's a great memory. In
There you go.
February, we used to use a compost vendor called Danny's Dumpsters, and we were by far like his biggest customer in that we sent him a ton of food waste, maybe 25 tons a month. And our volume was just too big for him to sustain anymore. So we weren't able to send food waste to him starting in February. And it just took several months for us to find another compost vendor. So
you at the current time, you have solved that problem with another resource.
Yes, we are currently using Atlas Composting out of Greenville, South Carolina, and that's why our diversion rate has gone back up.
All right. My second question relates to your anaerobic digester and whether you have methane in excess of your heating needs. Right there, yes, on the right.
Yeah, that's a great question. We try not to flare methane, but we often do, and I think that that's really one of the areas of opportunity that we plan to look at in the coming year. We can use the biogas in our boilers, but our warranty limits the volume of biogas that can be mixed in with natural gas in those boilers, so we're limited there. And then we've had some challenges with our microturbines. The way that we produce biogas isn't a steady stream like you would get out of your pipeline from, say, Dominion. It's inconsistent in flow, so we're often having to start and stop the microturbines, which causes a lot of wear and tear, which ultimately means that the microturbines are down for maintenance or have technical issues more frequently than we would prefer. So that is also a reason that we flare biogas. But we don't really have enough biogas.
I have an idea how you might solve that. You could take your excess and run it to a natural gas engine, but you have to get the pressure equalized. Fortunately, there's an outfit that's about 6 miles from you that makes devices that will do that. So I'm volunteering to make a connection.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We're looking at all of our different options. I know and our Chico facility is investing in some equipment to better scrub and blend biogas into natural gas. That may be a opportunity for us, but that's a pretty big investment. So yes, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, I would love to have that conversation with you.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you so much, David.
So we have another question. This one's from Mike. This one is, if an industry is considering an on-site composting facility, could this qualify for the property tax credits?
You know what? I would love to double check that for you. Yes, go back one slide if you don't mind. There you go. Shoot me an email. Let's see, forward one more. There you go. If you could shoot me an email, I would love to verify that. I'm fairly certain it does, but I do need to double check that.
Wonderful. And we can connect you to, just in case you don't have time to jot down all that information.
Fantastic.
So, are there any other hands raised, Don?
Not at the moment.
Okay. So Leah, you had mentioned that you report your I'm trying to remember what it's called now, the GHG emissions. Who do you report those to? Is that just a self-report, or do you actually subscribe to any program?
That's a great question. We report through the climate registry, which is based out of California, but they cover the entire country. And you can find our inventory there. We were verified for our 2018 baseline year, so that's available to the public.
Wonderful. So someone just asked, and this is a great time to remind everybody, yes, we will be sending out the slides and the recording. They'll be posted on our website, but anybody who registered, even if they weren't able to attend, will be sent out information on where they can find that information. So that will be done. Leah, have you looked at GHG impacts of different packaging choices? For example, bottles versus glass, I think they make cans. Is one more sustainable than the other?
That is a really great question, and one of the projects that I am most excited about as we start to build our long-term strategy, just through the labor of going through building out our scope 3 inventory, we saw a lot of benefits for both cans and glass bottles. So I don't want to necessarily say one is better over the other, but cans offer a lot of benefits in that they are more easily recycled, or maybe not more easily, but more easily collected for recycling, so that reduces our downstream impacts. They also are lighter weight, and you can fit more in a truck, so it makes more sense from a transportation perspective to use cans. but there's still some work that we need to do with both of our suppliers to see which one makes more sense over the other. So I'd hate to share my hypothesis with you on what I think is the more environmentally friendly option until I have more data to share.
Makes sense. All right. And you presented a calculator that you use. Was that developed by Sierra Nevada, or did that come from your climate registry group, or?
Yeah, that was I made that calculator in
Oh,
Excel, just using our greenhouse gas data. I can generally use Excel. I think I'm fairly good at it, but I'm certainly not an Excel guru or whiz. So it's pretty low tech and was fairly easy and quick for me to do. It's just a matter of breaking down the information and then creating the connections between cells. So highly recommend if you like playing in Excel to make your own. It's pretty quick and easy.
yeah, it looked like a good tool. Don, are there any other hands raised?
No, not currently, Angela.
All right. Oh, we just got another question pop in. Sorry if this has gone over, but do you think shrink wrap on your pallets, or have you tested out reusable banding options like larger rubber bands or pallet netting?
That's a really great question, and something that we were actually just talking about kind of recently, how we can look at ways to reduce the amount of shrink wrap that we're using. We produce a lot of material, so we haven't really looked at a way to use reusable netting. Most of the material that we're sending out, it doesn't come back to us, and it would be a big logistical change. So our first effort is around reducing the total amount of shrink wrap that we're using. But that's certainly an area, we have a long, extensive project list of all the different things that we want to work on, and that's near the top for us as well.
Wonderful. All right. Anybody else have any questions? You can type them in right quick, or raise your
Angela, I
hand.
think someone wanted to know if the slide deck will be sent out from today's presentations.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll both post it online and send it out to anyone who registered. Yep, and we'll send you the link so you can refer other people to it as well.
And I just sent out a message to everybody. Be sure to check out the ESI events page at www.ncesi.org for not only this event's recording link and slide deck, but other past ESI webinars.
Yeah, if you go to our main page and click on that events button, you'll see all the various events that we hold, almost all of which are now virtual, at least until the pandemic's under control and we can start seeing each other in person again. So for the whole past year, there's lots of recorded information there for you to go back and review. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions. Anybody else have any?
So Leah, I actually had a question, and probably our recycling side of the house already knows the answer, but I hadn't heard anything. So one of the issues we were hearing about in North Carolina was that some of the breweries were having an issue printing directly on their cans. So they were wrapping their cans to get their logos and information on there. How does Sierra Nevada, do they print directly on the cans, or do you guys wrap?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that the Brewers Association, our national industry group, has been trying to do a lot of education about and trying to find alternatives. Sierra Nevada, we print all of our cans and labels on them. We do occasionally at our Chico facility have some very small runs of pilot beers that we use stickers, but the vast majority of the cans that we purchase are pre-printed, and that's mainly because of our economy of size, and that's just nearly impossible for smaller brewers to invest in. So if you're a small brewery trying to get pre-printed cans, that's going to be insanely expensive over options to add labels or plastic wrap labels. But certainly a challenge, and something that while we don't necessarily use those labels. We've been doing a lot of advocacy and education around through our work with the Brewers Association. That was just as like a side note, that was actually the reason I connected with Mike, because I had reached out to him asking about the impacts of shrink wrap labels and sticker labels on cans. And that's how we connected about the cooperative.
Interesting. Angela, Don, any further questions?
Not on my end.
Nor on mine.
Okay, Lee, if you'll advance to that last slide then. Perfect, thank you. And again, Leah and Mike, great information, and thank you both for speaking today to cross-pollinate ideas amongst the sustainability and P2 community. Thank you to our ESI members for your contributions to the program and to everyone that joined us today. If you're not an ESI member, you can be added to our marketing list by sending a message to our service account, which is esi@ncdnr.gov, or reaching out directly to either Angela or Dawn, whose contact information was noted earlier in the slide deck. And as Angela reminded everyone, you will get a follow-up email coming soon. It'll take us a day or two to get that webinar recording link edited and up live. And with that, you'll get a PDF version of the presentation slides. Feel free to share those, and they will be posted to the ESI website, which is www.ncesi.org. Lastly, when you leave, there will be a survey to get your feedback. Please take a few minutes to complete it, as this helps us improve the ESI program and to make sure we are offering information on topics in which you are interested. Thank you again for attending, and everyone stay safe.